Good evening. Thank you. Good evening, everybody. I'm Eileen Fuchs. I'm the President and Executive Director of the National Building Museum, and it is my absolute extreme pleasure to welcome you to the nation's Museum for the Built Environment. Thank you. Okay, that's the crowd I'm talking about. All right. We were established by an act of Congress in 1980, and our mission is to inspire curiosity about the world we design and build. Tonight, we are here to celebrate the 25th anniversary of the Vincent Scully Prize. Thank you for joining us this evening in honor of the 2024 Vincent Scully Prize laureate, Walter Hood. Established in 1999, the Vincent Scully Prize recognizes exemplary practice, scholarship, or criticism in architecture, historic preservation, and urban design. The museum is honored to steward the legacy of this prize as we cultivate a broader, more informed public. Please turn your attention now to the screen for a new short video about the Scully's Prize's storied history.
Established in 1999, the National Building Museum's Vincent Scully Prize is named for the esteemed professor who inspired many across the building disciplines. For more than 4 decades, his teaching and scholarship profoundly influenced architects, urban planners, and countless others, showing not only how to see buildings, but how to connect architecture to the rest of our lives. The museum presents the annual Vincent Scully Prize, recognizing exemplary practice, scholarship, or criticism in architecture, historic preservation, and urban design. The prize's inaugural committee, chaired by David M. Schwarz, was formed by 18 distinguished figures in American architecture, including I.M. Pei, Philip Johnson, Frank Gehry, and Michael Graves. The committee envisioned the prize to amplify how we think about where we live. After first honoring Scully himself, the award was bestowed upon urbanist, author, and activist Jane Jacobs, whose writings revolutionized the way we think about cities. In 2002, the prize celebrated Robert Venturi and Denise Scott Brown, architects, planners, and theorists, for their seminal work and groundbreaking approaches to context. In 2005, the Scully Prize recognized His Highness the Aga Khan for inspiring communities to appreciate the vital impact of the built environment on quality of life. We continued to celebrate significant contributions to architecture and urban planning, ensuring connection with a wider public. In 2012, the prize was awarded to architecture critic Paul Goldberger, who taught us that architecture is not just about buildings, but about all of culture and community. For his work enriching public and civic life through landscape design, we recognize the distinguished landscape architect Laurie Olin in 2017. More recently, we celebrated architect, scholar, and writer Mabel Wilson, who has contributed to our understanding of how race, culture, and history intersect with the built environment. In 2024, in the 25th year of the prize, the National Building Museum and the prize jury are honored to recognize landscape designer, artist, and educator Walter Hood. Hood's work transforms our understanding of ordinary urban spaces by creating new ways to see the beauty and possibilities around us, particularly in areas that remain unseen. For the last 25 years, the museum has stewarded Vincent Scully's legacy by celebrating those who shape the built environment, while advancing public knowledge to ensure discussions remain relevant and timely. We look forward to the next 25 years as the prize continues to recognize those who challenge the boundaries of the built environment, fostering a new generation of designers, scholars, and advocates to imagine a future that is more resilient, equitable, and inspiring.
Before we proceed, I would like to take a moment to acknowledge Tappy Lynn, the wife of Vincent Scully, who is joining us tonight. Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you for being here and to honor your husband's enduring legacy. We're so honored to have you here tonight, Tappy. The nomination and selection process for each year's recipient is overseen by the prize jury. This year's esteemed jury includes Esther DaCosta-Meyer, art historian and professor emeritus at Princeton University, Nancy Levinson, editor and executive director of Places Journal, Stephen Luani, director of the University of Arkansas Community Design Center, Toshiko Mori, architect and professor in the practice of architecture at Harvard University Graduate School of Design, and is led by Chair Paul Goldberger, architecture critic and contributing editor at Vanity Fair, and a dear friend of the museum's. I'd like to now welcome Paul to say a few words.
Thank you so much, Eileen, and let me add also a welcome to Tappy. It's wonderful to have you as here to share in celebrating Vince's legacy. As you've heard in that wonderful video, this prize does not so much honor architecture itself as the public understanding and appreciation of it. Vince Scully was a great scholar and historian, but in some ways he may have been an even greater figure in architectural culture. He taught and shaped many great architects, but even more, I suspect, he made many great clients and taught myriad thousands of people over the years how to see, how to think of architecture as part of the broader culture. So the prize honors many people who are themselves great designers, but it honors them for their impact on public understanding. Esther will say a little bit more about that in just a moment. It's been my great privilege to chair this jury. They've been introduced already by Eileen, but let me say that it's not only an incredibly knowledgeable group, but a warm and collegial and thoughtful one that shares a deep respect for the prize, respect for Vince Scully, and also a real commitment to finding a winner who is not just deserving, but appropriate for this particular moment in history. And we're exceptionally happy and enthusiastic that that person is Walter Hood. Now, if I can ask Esther DaCosta-Meyer, our esteemed fellow jury member, to come and just say another word or two about Vincent Scully.
A word or two about Vincent Scully. It is impossible to do justice to a man of his stature in a few minutes. He was a riveting lecturer. Nobody came anywhere close to him. He was a path-breaking scholar who constantly challenged received assumptions about architecture. He was a gifted writer. His prose was absorbing, incandescent. It was unforgettable. And I would say, although he never used the word, that he was an activist whose high belief in the high calling of architecture led him to stand up again and again in defense of historic preservation. And I might add, in defense of other issues, many other issues having to do with social justice. His lectures were spellbinding. Many people have said he had a historical imagination, but he also used an epic yardstick. You could feel history sweeping by as the centuries flashed on the screen of the darkened auditorium of the Yale Law School. He made buildings come alive, and his range and erudition were prodigious. He covered over 2,000 years of history, from the monumental to the vernacular and art, as well as architecture. And Scully's lectures were life-changing, and they continued to resonate long after we graduated. And there are other former students in the room, and they know this for a fact. One day, sooner or later, you find yourself in a godforsaken place somewhere. But you have just seen a Greek temple or a Palladian villa, and you feel in your heart that your life has been enhanced. This building, the power of the architecture that Vince discussed, has really enhanced. It has amplified your sense of self. That was Vince Scully. As an art historian, Scully broke new ground, often to the horror of academic authorities entrenched in their disciplinary silos. Classicists of the late 60s and early 70s often angrily rejected his view that the Greek architects of the past took the environmental setting into account when they planned their buildings. But Vince's masterful insight has continued to yield important results in architecture around the world and in many different cultures, including ancient cultures. Pre-Hispanic Mexico comes to mind. How can you think of that without Vince Scully's lessons? And Scully also believed that architecture was deeply influenced by society, and it was capable of influencing society in turn, for good or ill. And this, of course, placed enormous responsibility on architects. And it was in this spirit that he wrote of Washington's own Capitol building, that, quote, "It was not a palace for a king who sought to embrace the new image of dominion, but the Capitol building of a new republic, one of the first of the emerging nations of modern times." In these words, we can hear the son of an Irish immigrant, Vince, a son who took a passionate interest in this country, a son who was aware of the vulnerabilities of democracy in all periods. And it was because of this that he saw architecture as a bulwark, architecture at its best, as a bulwark able to defend and embody the human rights we hold dear. And it was also because of this firmly held belief that he held architects and architectural historians accountable for their words and deeds. And these, of course, these values are the ones that are embodied in the Vincent Scully Prize. Excellence in architecture, the courage of one's conviction, and a capacity for wonder at the power of the human imagination to articulate our dreams and our aspirations and to give them built form.
Good evening. I'm pleased to be on a jury awarding the Vincent Scully Prize to Walter Hood. Having received degrees in architecture, landscape architecture, and art, Hood's practice and scholarship shows us how to work across scale and design methodologies in the shaping of place. All important because 80% of future design commissions will involve rehabilitation, entailing the readaptation of buildings, landscapes, infrastructure, cities, and ecosystems to meet pressing challenges. Repair has become culturally significant. It requires new design vocabularies to reframe performance in social, economic, and environmental systems. Walter Hood's work is at the forefront of practices focused on systems thinking through people and place. Whether a museum or public landscape, Walter Hood finds the broader public interest rarely explicit in project briefs. His Making Yards project, a streetscape to revitalize a shuttered downtown, recalls an erased African-American past. Hood's solution evokes memories of the site's buried history, reinterpreted through a wonderfully strange, hybrid urban landscape, recombining yard, park, plaza, and street. Here, social and economic repair entails a reckoning with colonial past, du jour or state-sponsored segregation, and the recognition that Black history is American history. Likewise, Hood's revamp of Oakland's Lafayette Square Park to accommodate a growing homeless population required him to again insist on the value of difference rather than diversity in combating normative narratives that homogenize our places. Continuing this park's tradition of social service, Hood's solution welcomes everyone, from the homeless to business people and children alike, through a set of archetypal forums that host different social worlds within one space. In Jamaica Queen's Baisley Park Community Garden, Hood shaped a neighborhood space through foodscapes inspired by the vernacular growing technologies of classical French kitchen gardens. Now an iconic park, its regenerative ecologies help reconstitute environmental stewardship and social connection among residents. Or consider his Splash Pad Park in Oakland. Despite being a park under the freeway, it sponsors the city's largest farmers market. Here, Repair reintroduces neighborhood structure into a vague terrain that has resulted from highway infrastructure cutting through neighborhoods. These public works manifest equal levels of exploration as Hood's widely celebrated institutional landscapes. Hood's recent Ancestors Memorial Garden at the International African American Museum in Charleston is a masterful synthesis of topics on memory, dual heritage, materiality, ethnobotanical landscapes, and the reconstitution of the Black body in space, topics that he has examined over the last 25 years. His restless curiosity is supported by a robust process involving immersive research, extensive scenario planning, and experimentation with artistic processes that hold together highly layered projects. Resisting the sameness that diminishes our environments, Walter Hood rightfully describes his work, and I quote, as holding different worlds in the same space. His skill in strange making, a rare intelligence all its own, is arguably what we need most today. Given Scully's own deep design intelligence, the unpredictability of his interests, his equal admiration for the vernacular mind as high design, his examination of continuity between the classical and the modern, and his discussion of design through people and place, it is most fitting we reward Walter Hood the Vincent Scully Prize. Thank you.
Now, on behalf of the National Building Museum, I'm honored to present the Vincent Scully Prize. Please, jurors, join me to Walter Hood.
Wow, how's everybody tonight? Woo. Where are my landscape people? Are they here? Ah. There's architecture in landscape architecture, just to let you guys know. Thanks for coming out, guys. It's a pleasure to be here, and Stephen, you basically gave my lecture, but I'll try to not recapitulate too much. And Lippy, Tippy, I hope I can be, Tappy, I hope I can be informal. It's a pleasure to see you in front of me and to know of the legacy of your husband. A few years ago, before the great pause in 2020, I was teaching at Yale, and one of the things I loved about Yale was the scale of the auditorium. And I know why his lectures were so amazing. It was like being in a living room versus being in a vacuous sort of setting. But I appreciated everything, and I heard really great stories that hopefully I can upheld that tradition. First, though, I'd like to thank the Building Museum members, Eileen, folks, Jacqueline Sawyer, who's no longer here, Diane Taylor, and the esteemed jury, Paul Goldberger, Esther de la Costa Meyer, Nancy, Stephen, and Tashika Mori, who can't be here. I've been teaching at UC Berkeley, when I think about this, close to 35 years. And when I heard the 4 decades of Scully, I was like, wow, I'm getting close. But I was also educated at Berkeley in the architecture and landscape architecture department. And thinking of Scully, I was trying to figure out a connection. And I thought about my history teacher, Spiro Kostoff, and I said, I wonder if he knew Scully. And of course, he was a student of Scully. And before I went to Berkeley for architecture and landscape architecture, history was not something of interest to me. As some of my colleagues from undergraduate would attest to, I was really bad at history, landscape art, particularly those dates. I loved art history, but history never fascinated me because no one ever presented it to me in a way that was compelling. And I remember the first lecture I saw by Spiro Kostoff, people got up and clapped, and no one wanted to leave the auditorium. And every morning from 9 to 10:30, Monday and Wednesday, you just didn't want to leave because he made history come to life. And for me, there was one particular lecture. It was on the Third Rome. And at that time in the early 90s, no one really talked about fascism or talked about politics and architecture. But Spiro laid out Mussolini and Italy in a way that made me want to go to that place and see that place. Because he said Mussolini was an emperor, just like the emperors before them. And then he laid out what he did like emperors, like finishing the Campidoglio that we all learned in college that I thought was already done before then. He also planted trees along the Roman road. He also cleared out the ruins, and he made a line, Foro Imperiale, from his palace to the Colosseum to show his power. And it made me think that, as Kostoff said, architecture is a social act, but it's material theater through this human activity. And all of us have this chance to participate. The first book I saw by Scully was the shingle style and the stick style. And when I came to California, I knew nothing about the bungalow and ways of building. And it was the clearest thing to me to look at a building there and understand how it was made. As I said, I've taught a course at Berkeley for 35 years, and one of the courses during the 90s that was asked of professors is to teach a course in American cultures. And you could teach about anything that you want to. And I chose to think about landscape through the eyes of different subcultural groups, and particularly African Americans and Native Indians. And that was for the first time I started to dive deep into myself, but also into how landscape was leaving out all of these stories. And I remember I was using the history of urban form by Reps, who had these beautiful drawings of how all cities started, but he never talked about race, never talked about issues that I was interested in, but he always laid out these very clear origin stories. And I would present it, this is the 90s, I would present it and my students would be like, why are we studying colonial history? Over and over throughout the 90s. And what's nice about a career, at a certain point, time catches up with you. And when 2020 hit, it was a moment that all of a sudden there was some clarity because for the 20 years before, I had been in this kind of place. And all of a sudden people started asking questions that I was hoping they would ask 20 years before. But now as we stand here today, I wanted to sort of take a step back and really think about those people and things that have informed my career. And I wanted to talk about it primarily through what I was, sort of the career that I'm still in practice in, and that's landscape architecture. And one of the things during COVID and over the last 5 years in teaching and working on my book, Hybrid Landscapes, I was asking myself, during a period of time when landscape architecture was really coming into itself, what about people like me and what was their place? And how can you make decisions in a world where you have this duality? I was born in a Jim Crow South in North Carolina. I didn't spend a lot of time in it, but it had an impact on me. And there was these dualities that were always around. I always saw myself as other, right? And then when I got out of school, I actually arrived to DC and I worked for the National Capital Planning team here. My first job was here in DC. And we worked out in Falls Church. And as my friend Roger somewhere can attest, there were certain places you just couldn't go. And if you went there, you were told not to be there. And then if you stayed, they took you somewhere else. And so this duality that played as I moved up the Eastern Seaboard, I came into contact with that other, whether it was North Philadelphia, whether it was Harlem, places where people looked at you in a completely different way. So when I look back on the history of these things that I learned, Radburn, 27, Paley Park, 66, these are ideas that were coming about in a double America. And how were people part of that, or did they even see themselves as part of that? And so I started to think, then can we begin to embrace these dualities? And then looking back at my work, it's interesting how the work has embraced the double logic, that you can go to places and you can go, oh, that's a black community, or that's a poor community, or that's an immigrant community, and we're okay with the other. Or you can recognize the double semiotic. Murals are okay for that community, or we don't do murals in this community, right? I mean, there's these dualities. Freeway goes here, oh, you can't put a freeway over here. Oh, they look okay with a freeway, we do not look good with a freeway. And then the last is that we don't think about is the consciousness, right? That duality that Du Bois talked about, that veil that people have to wear. And what happens over time when you wear the veil? And then when you remove the veil, can you even exist? If you've been veiled the whole time, how do you exist? And so when I hear people say things like, oh, we planted trees in that neighborhood and they tore them down because they were veiled. Never saw any freaking trees before. So why would someone want those trees? And so this idea of how do we deal with the dualities? And so just taking a quick ride through some of the work, which has been refreshing to see, this is one of the first set of models that I made in Cortlandt Creek Park. These were actually made for an Italian summer program, so they were actually made with Chianti wine and plaster. But it tells the story of a train line, of a light rail that went through a community, and over time the train left. And what was interesting on the right, when the train left, no one did anything with the space. And so people had to live in an environment with a 40-foot wide right-of-way and a creek, and no one really cared about it. And so we planted 150 purple leaf plum trees, and they bloom every spring in a neighborhood that doesn't see any beauty. Or making yards, as was just suggested, a competition that we didn't think we were going to win, where we looked at the rich history and we said, well, why not begin to tell this story through landscape? They didn't have plazas, they had wide streets, and we said, why not put yards there? And we called them yards because during the competition brief, they didn't want to take us through the street. They took us to the things that they valued, but not the things they devalued. And so we dust off the Daughters of the Confederacy obelisk, which was hidden, and we actually gave it a fountain, and then we put bales of cotton in the street to tell the story. In 2020, people went and saw the obelisk and said, let's tear it down. But that again is part of the social work. 20 years before, no one even cared about the obelisk and the dances that went on at night, but now we really, really care. Or Lafayette Square Park, Old Man's Park in the 20s, this logic had poor people going to one place. And we found over time, if we embrace that, that maybe people can get their haircuts in a barbershop, in a park. Or that through the composition, we can say something about how we make homogeneous space, and can we make spaces where people cannot be about kumbaya, but be about being separate, but also being together. Or the logic of development of communities. This is the Hill community in Pittsburgh, from Hill Street Blues, the police show from the 80s. This was the crack epidemic in 1,000 acres, where people see it as the other. And we try to work with them to say, well, over the last 50 years, this place has regenerated, and you already have nature here. Why do you need to make it anew? But they couldn't see us in this landscape. So of course, they're tearing it down and building it anew. But through this kind of work of the semiotic, of the logic, these places are still places that people look at, and they see them as other. You go to Pittsburgh and you say you want to go to the Hill, they will immediately tell you, you want to be safe there, right? Or in Oakland, the history of urban renewal is very, very, very potent. And in a lot of projects, like the Hill project and this one, we didn't try for solutions. We just basically tried to have a conversation with the place. And in some places, you're not going to change them if you cannot change the infrastructure that is setting up the logic. And so here, we just said, let's put our heroes over the street at the scale of the freeway, and that's all we can do. This was a streetscape project. Can you imagine getting a streetscape project in a place that's redeveloped? Here's a few $1,000s, plant some trees and garbage cans. And so we said, let's do something completely different. Or the Oakland Museum, which started in the 60s by Kevin Roach and Dan Kiley, during a time that was very optimistic, using brutalism. And I started to think, brutalism was about community. So they were actually using the style of architecture to talk about community. And it was supposed to open and be free. They brought 3 museums together. But right next door, Huey Newton was on trial. It was 68. So they closed the walls. And they put one entry, and then they charged money over time. And so working today, we're trying to bring that sense of freedom and expectation back by cutting those walls and bringing people in. And I'm hoping Kiley and Roach somewhere are smiling, because we found models very early that they didn't have walls around it, but they actually had this porous exterior. Or lastly, People's Park, this other logic that I just have problems with, that People's Park goes back again to the civil rights, free speech, but at the same time, urban renewal is going on in Oakland and in San Francisco. But for 50 years, people kept this park. And then it became something completely different. And working there today, we brought in a circuit that has no end. So it will always be a park for people, even though housing and things like that are coming in it as well. But these logics are all around us. And if we don't see them, we fall prey to them. Again, the Northwest here, there was like, you don't go there. There are certain places that stay in our imagination. And we have to get out of these logics, because from the planning to the architecture to the landscape, we just keep reinforcing them. And so when we think of semiotics, again, I love that you embrace my strangeness. We say this in the office a lot, that if it's not ready to go out if it doesn't look strange or different. And this started as we began to sort of work in the 90s, just working on projects that had these strange contexts. And imagine trying to do a pastoral park here, which someone might do, with some little squiggly lines and some trees, and then walk away without saying, well, maybe the freeway needs a friend. Maybe the lake needs a friend. So this idea of strangeness for us was really about taking disparate pieces from the street, from the park, from the plaza, and beginning to crash them together that maybe you would see something different. Or at the DeYoung Museum, when we worked on it 25 years ago now, the old museum was there, and they got a new machine museum. But no one really talked about what was below the ground. And as they dug the pit out for the building, all you saw was sand falling in, sand. And so we basically took that on and said, can we make an aesthetic thinking of sand? And so as you move around the museum, the flora, we borrowed, right, from the fiction that was around, but we made people look at the ground. So when you go to the DeYoung, I guarantee you'll look down, because the ground is just this play of surface that tries to reveal or talk about what's underfoot. And then every now and then the flora begins to speak in a completely different way. But this idea of trying to get to the place where people will go, well, why are there eucalyptus trees in a courtyard? Well, these will be the last eucalyptus trees in California at some point, because they're eradicating the eucalyptus. So again, finding these stories you can have. Or in New York on Fifth Avenue, suggesting that maybe you can do historic preservation by digging and finding rocks to replace a design that was never done by Schimmerhorn, and through a strategy, finding rock and then making a rockery that never existed. So through this strangeness, we look to different material, whether it's recycled material in Buffalo, or whether it's 120-year-old olive trees in Los Angeles. How to get people to see their place and space in a different way. There's no correct way. There's just the prompt that the project brief holds. But if you look closely at places, Bunker Hill, there's no ground here. So how do you get people to think that maybe there's a tunnel under here, right? But again, suggesting these things. Or a glacier coming through Jackson Hole, where people parked in a 300-car parking lot in an amazing glaciated landscape and working with them for 5 years to say, well, maybe you don't need 300 cars, maybe 150 will do. Or as 7 million people cross the bay daily, can you get them to stop and really think about something different that's being developed by lots of developers? And in America, we hate ruins. Even when you talk about ruins, people go, why do you want to keep that, right? Here we kept the ruin. And it's funny, talking to our client over and over, at the last minute, they came out and said, why do you want to keep this? And they came out and they walked in between this water tank and it's like, it looks like a ruin. But sometimes you got to bring the horse to the water. And now it's hopefully will become one of these amazing places in the middle of the bay that you don't need a sign to talk about history. That people will come there and go, well, why are these walls so thick? Why is it at the highest point? And hopefully at some point they will deduce water used to be held here. And the last piece, and this is for my colleagues who went to school with me, this is us, Roger and Ted. Ted, are you in there? Ted's not in here. Okay, but Rogers is there. This is from 1981. We were the first program at North Carolina A&T to basically have a landscape architecture program. And thanks to Charles Fountain for pulling that off, who had a connection to Berkeley and Ball State. But when I got out of school, again, I could not imagine a career in landscape. I thought I was getting a job, I was going to go make some money, right, have a profession. But over time, I then looked back to this point in time and to see how the double consciousness of being an African American in a very, very white profession, how would I find my way and how would I find my voice? And one of the things that happened in the late 90s was we got a chance at University of Virginia to work on a project about Kitty Foster, a free black woman. They found her remains as they were moving the campus south. And I remember I was like, I'm going to create a project that speaks about these mythologies. And I said, I'm going to make a shadow catcher. And when the light hits the ground, her spirit will go to heaven. And I said that in a presentation. I just knew I was going to get fired. No one said anything. $350,000 for this, $200 million for the other thing. No one really cared. But we ended up building this. And that was the first time a voice came out that was unrecognizable to me to a certain degree, but it was a kind of a freedom that began to actually coalesce. And from that project, this portal and this burial ground that speaks right to the sculptural quality of our history led to freedmen over in Virginia, where again, my client was like, I don't know if you want to talk about that. And I was like, I'm seeing too many of these freedmen signs and they're all gray and they all say the same thing. What if we interrogate this a little bit more? I didn't even know Arlington Cemetery was a place where the first freedmen village were, and our ancestors were there and then moved out into the diaspora of Virginia. And so in this small park where people want to establish that firm foothold, we actually have freed. And I remember coming to the meeting, you'll tell them, with this little thing that said freed, and I turned it this way and that way, said, do we want people to recognize freed? And then someone's like, no, it should say freedom. And we had these big discussions, should it say freed or freedom? And thank God we stayed with freed. We got Adinkra symbols there that talks about all the different names our communities have taken on. But now when you go to knock, there's a sentinel in gold, 40 feet tall, that you can't miss in front of the new gentry. So every morning they wake up and they look out and they go, wow, someone's freed. Or my friend Freddie here at the witness walls, who was a civil rights hero, who was on buses that were bombed, who allowed me to work and never told me that that was him in the picture. And on opening day, he came up, was like, Walter, that's me. Or working in Princeton, my colleagues here, where the only time I opened a project and someone said, what the fuck, right? But a project that really required, right, that anger, that angst, right, that people wanted to protest, and how could you make a work that could advocate in a way that could get people to change? And sure enough, Mr. Wilson's name is no longer on the building. Or stories that we don't like to talk about, St. Monica Tears or the Crying Rock, where the Tonga Indians were pushed over the cliffs and the Spaniards, their history is still celebrated today. but how might art in a public realm, big stone pieces, begin to start a different conversation? And then with people we lose, how might we have these larger conversations around loss in a time where social order has broken down, but how can we give people a place of solace and a place where they can have conversations within that loss in an amazing landscape? And then lastly, how might we talk about the past in a powerful way? The work in Charleston didn't start with the museum, but it started very early with our work in the Arts Festival, where we grew rice back in 2015 to bring the birds back into downtown Charleston. Because if you've ever been in Charleston, when it rains, your car will go flying down the street because it's a swamp. And just this idea of interrogating the landscape allowed for us then, when Harry Cobb called me up to work on this amazing project, that we could then perform this kind of archaeology, perform this kind of design, and bring people along with a narrative that Charleston never embraced, right? But one that was really underfoot. And through this narrative, how could landscape and architecture, how could place begin to kind of speak to things that have not been spoken before, but how it could also be celebratory. And as the director told me in a speech 6 months ago, she goes, "Walter, I want to have weddings here. I want this to be a place of joy and sorrow. But our places, we're dialectical people, right? It is that kind of spirit of a project and a place that we want to live with." And so I'm really honored to have this award. So hopefully the work can be re-examined and examined in a different light. But I have to say, a career in environmental design, architecture, landscape architecture, and art has been really rewarding, and I look forward to moving past. But one thing to my landscape architecture colleagues, our history is really important, and it's not one-sided. Right? We should have multiple stories, multiple ways to look at places. We should not be fetishing style, right? We should be fetishizing difference and having those hard conversations. So when people come to our projects and our work, they're touched by something, right, other than knowing, right? They're touched by the unknown. And more importantly, they're touched by the past. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Walter, for sharing your vision and your impact with us tonight. It's now my pleasure to welcome back Paul Goldberger to the stage, and also to introduce C.L. Bohannon, Associate Professor in the Landscape Architecture Department and the Associate Dean of Justice, Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion at the University of Virginia, to join Walter in conversation about his practice. We will open up the floor to a few audience questions at the end. Thank you.
Thank you. Walter, thank you so much for that. That was really extraordinary. Let me start by asking both of you something very basic about landscape, which is that we normally think of landscape architecture or landscape design as a way of kind of escaping, using nature as, I mean, that certainly was very Olmstedian, you know, thinking of nature as the beautiful way in which we escape. And even given Olmsted's own interest in social justice and democracy, he interpreted it as, okay, we'll all escape together. So he didn't use it as an occasion for difference, but nevertheless, it was an occasion for escape. As you conceive it, it seems, it's not about escaping, but about facing certain realities. Is that a fair thing to say?
Yeah, no,
Okay.
I think it's a fair thing to say. My experience, I grew up in North Carolina.
Right.
I grew up in a landscape. I never thought of that landscape was an escape.
Right, okay.
Right? It was a setting in which, you know, we grew up in, and it had an impact. The thing to escape was not nature.
Right, right.
Right? The building was the escape, right? Because you spend a lot of the time outside the building because of many other reasons.
Sia, what about you?
Yeah,
Your
so
sense of it.
Can y'all hear me? Here we go. So for me, I grew up in Memphis, Tennessee on the river. So the landscape I saw was indicative to my ancestors, right? And the goods and services that flowed up and down that river. And there was no escape. There was a facing of that. Cotton, wood, all those things, those are part of the very fabric of the city of Memphis. Even to in the ways in which public space was celebrated. We had 4 squares in the city of Memphis, and one of them was named, well, I'll give you names of 2. One was Court Square, and the other one was Auction. So you take a guess of what was auctioned.
What was getting auctioned, right,
Exactly.
right.
So for us,
And that name
Yeah.
continued right into
they still call it that.
still auction.
So it was always confronting the history. There was never an escape with that.
Right, right. Well, that's a perfect segue into my next question, which is that, you know, it's interesting that on your website, you describe your firm as a social art and design practice. And the word landscape is not there. One doesn't get into it till farther down. It seems to me as if there's anything your work makes clear, it's that landscape design and public space are one and the same thing. And that you're kind of investigating the connection between those two. Is that a fair thing to say?
Yeah, landscape is all around us, right? I mean, you know, when I create this profession of architecture, it somehow separates itself from the landscapes.
Right,
and,
right.
you know, those of us who had the privy of J.B. Jackson and some of the other kind of cultural or anthropologists who wrote about landscape, those were things that fascinated me because those were things that were not taught. They weren't central to the education. They were always kind of these outliers, right? I mean, they were
Right.
not in our history course. And I always was drawn to those things as ways of understanding cultural production and the social production of space versus the designer making, right? But the designer actually being part of that process.
You know, it's interesting. I was first introduced to J.B. Jackson as a student of Scully's, actually. In fact, that was where I first read J.B. Jackson when Scully assigned it, in fact. Yes, yes. Sia, what about you on that issue? I mean, this sense of public space and landscape as ultimately, at least today, being one and the same. Is that a fair? Is it a fair statement? Would you
Yeah, I think it's a fair statement if we as, I'm speaking as a landscape architect
Sure,
here.
sure.
Yeah, if we as landscape architects understand our power, when we draw a line and we either are including someone in that space or we are excluding someone in that space. And so thinking through how your starting point to creating space, like what are we actually doing? Because otherwise it's too easy to recreate the problems that our profession has been part of, redlining, et cetera, you know, all these other kind of things I won't give a full lecture about today. But
That's okay. You can give a partial lecture about it. It's all right.
But I do think we as designers have to have a clear understanding of what our starting point is. Yeah. What is the very, very essence of public space? And are we going to be exclusive, much like in Walter's presentation? Are we're going to, you know, take a stance where we're leaving people out, and that's kind of the easy thing to do, or is it something where we're actually going to be inclusive and actually be able to tell a broader story about what American life really is? And too often, Black and brown communities have not been a part of that.
Right.
Right. And so
Right,
that's
right.
the beauty of Walter's work, I think. Yeah.
But I think, if I may say this, one of the most remarkable things to me that Walter said, if I'm interpreting this correctly, is that being inclusive is not itself enough,
Right.
and that this notion of dualities that you brought in, and in fact the line that Stephen quoted, where you said, you know, the notion of of having two different places in the same space. So, let's explore that a little bit more, because I think there's something very, very important there in suggesting that we conceptualize public space, landscape, and relationship to history not in a kind of either or thing, but a both and. You know, that it's not just about, okay, here's a nice space that was once not open to all, and we're going to be really good and open it to all. And I think what you're saying, if I take it correctly, is that's not quite enough. Somehow we must redesign it so that the history of it not being open to all is still somehow visible.
Or,
is that right?
Or that people feel comfortable sharing that space with those differences on their sleeves, not hidden.
Right,
because,
right.
I mean, I do think this is when I say our, I'm talking African Americans, people who've been marginalized in this country, and particularly in the last century, with separate but equal, and having to live in these separate places, that you can look at our culture as the resilient culture, because we had to do both things. Where the dominant culture only had to do one thing, and they still only choose to do one thing. And so I had someone ask me recently from a really big university, you know, they said, Mr. Hood, I'm working in this community and I don't feel that I'm prepared. What do I need to do? And I'm like, really? I'm like, I've been working in your community all my career. Right? This idea, though, that there's this secret thing. It's not a secret thing. It's just, you just take it on face to face. And, you know, most of the time when I'm in a room, a lot of the times I'm the only person who looks like myself, too many times, but I still have to be there. Right. And when I go to a lot of meetings now in places with people like me, there's not a lot of others who feel comfortable being there. And that's problematic to a certain degree, because it's not about being comfortable. Right? It's about saying, this is what we do and this is what I believe. And so that comfort has to kind of shed itself. And I think I have this conversation with people in my studio as well, you know, that, you know, sometimes we're in these places that's unfamiliar to them, and we have these conversations, which are healthy conversations to have and to not have. And I think we don't have enough of these conversations, right? Where people should feel comfortable with their knowledge to be in these places and actually working together. And again, it doesn't have to be the same thing. You know, this idea that two different things can't be in the same place.
Right.
And we love ecology, so come on. Right? It's a beautiful thing about ecology. Right? It's where diversity is like champion.
Right. Nature gives us an example. It's not like, nature. It's not like nature naturally segregates.
Yeah, but we don't like weeds. Well, some people don't like weeds.
Okay.
Right? They just want to get rid of those damn weeds. Right? I just want to keep that lawn. Right? But all of a sudden those weeds come in and it's like, get them out of there, right? But again, that's just a metaphor for control, right? And again, in a society, there has to be some control that we agree on in this democracy to keep that democracy in place. But that control should not be on the freedom of those individuals, right? To have a good life and share a vision that might be different than your vision, right? And I was hoping, like in the talk, it took me literally 20 years in this profession to feel like I had a place where I could like be truthful. I'm not saying the previous 20 years I wasn't truthful. I just didn't let people know the truth, right? I mean, I just kind of kept it down here. But I think that's a hard thing, and you know, not a lot of people have the space that I have. Right?
Did you feel your sense of the truth, to use that term, evolved, or was it more a case of kind of keeping it inside and not communicating it?
It was having a space that someone presented to me that allowed it to happen, right? A lot of the spaces that we occupy, it's hard for that to find itself because there's a lot of control.
Right.
Yeah. Even, I mean, you guys know, you work on projects, there's control. You walk into that room and you go through these review things and the passive aggressiveness of it. It's like, just tell me the truth. If you tell me the truth, then I can deal with that. I can't deal with this muddling, right? of
Right.
keeping this thing at bay, because it's very clear, right, what you're holding back.
Right, right. Well, to some extent, of course, that is endemic in all design practices, not just landscape and not to
Architecture?
Architecture, certainly, and also, and also some of it is about economic power, because the client ultimately has has power that you do not have, even though you have creative power. They're buying it.
But that's
And
the
so-
beautiful thing of design, though, is part of it, as well as trying to reach the clientele. I do think there are ways in which we can bring the clients along.
Sure.
We have these tools to fascinate, to make people feel like they're making those decisions. Right? I mean, we have these tools in which, you know, we can prod and push people along, and
Sure.
sometimes they work and sometimes they don't.
No, right, and you know, we all know that the best architects and designers are the ones who convince clients that everything good about the project was their idea.
Right.
and we can go back to that whole idea in a second. Let me
Go ahead. Kind of a follow-up to
Oh,
to
please,
that.
please do, CL.
So one of the things I'm interested in, Walter, could you give us a little, break the veil in terms of how you have these conversations with your students? Because ultimately they're going to be the practitioners doing this work.
Yeah.
So could you tell us a little bit about how you're having that conversation with them through that space?
Well, my undergraduates, I teach a 300 plus undergraduate course, and they're like just hungry. I mean, they want it. I mean, I was just telling someone, one of my undergrads came up to me the other day from last semester, and she goes, "Professor Hood, they don't talk like you." I'm like, "What are you talking about?" "I'm taking these courses. They don't talk like you." I'm like, "What do you mean?" "They don't speak truth." Right? But they're hungry. They're hungry. And my graduate students are a different bunch. 'Cause they're coming, you know, they're coming with their own sort of circumstance, and it's harder for them, I see. Because race difference is just it's hard to deal with. I mean, we don't have the tools. And as one of my mentors, Randy Hester, said to me years ago, you got to have this kind of courage, right? That, you know, we don't know the answer, but you got to have that courage to actually look at things and challenge things. But as you're challenging, you use your medium, right? You don't challenge just to like speak out of the side of your neck. You challenge through the work.
Right.
And that's the more problematic thing I have, is getting students to see that the medium is what the medium is. We got some dirt, we got some trees, we got some water, we got some air, we got some objects. We don't have a lot of stuff. And I'm just tired of seeing the community garden become the answer to everything. Right? It's just like, you know, again, I'm talking to a thesis student today. It's like, oh, I want to do community gardens in LA. I'm like, why?
We have enough gardens.
Well, I mean,
But they see the medium as
you're right, but I mean,
that
it's better
thing.
than a parking lot, right?
No.
It's not? Wait a minute.
No, because it's just.
Why is it not better than a parking lot?
Well, because it's still coming out of that same place. It's like, this is the answer. There's no answer. They're looking for an answer. Okay, how do I deal with cars? Oh, parking lot. No, there's lots of ways of dealing with it. There's like these things, you can stack them. You can do a lot of things. And with the community garden, it becomes a way of saying, okay, there's a food desert, there's poor people, I'm a landscape person, you're gonna grow your own food. I'm like, I'm not gonna work in some, give me a little bit more. I mean, tell me, if you really care about my food security, why are you doing landscape architecture? Right? I mean, but give me some like sunshine on my face, give me some bees. I mean, there are these other things that we can give to communities that we don't think about. And I've had projects where, we planted some lavender in a subsidized housing project, and within a week I get a call that I got to come down, and they're like, we got bees. And I was like, great. No, we got to get rid of them. We haven't seen the bees. And so they removed all the lavender. But this is
instead of seeing that as a sign of success of the project.
But again, how would you know if you don't have bees?
Right.
For the first time, your kids are out there playing. There's these things flying around. It's like, hold on. And again, this is what we don't see. Right? And thank God we have people out there now who are thinking of pollinating the city. I know Patricia is somewhere out here. But now that we have landscape architects, I think really thinking about the medium And what I mean by that is it's the stuff that we use. And it's not, again, a stylistic way of doing it, but it's like, if I'm going to plant some trees, how do I plant the trees? And it goes back to the 150 trees in 5 blocks.
Right.
And why would you do that? Well, because I might lose half of them. If I lose half, I still got 75. They're monocultural. Well, no, let's make them different. No, if you make them non-monocultural, people won't see them.
Right.
So it's like all of these things. And it's been 30 years now. And those trees are still there. So there are these very simple things I think that we can educate our students to say, maybe that's enough that we can do, and hopefully someone will see it and then add something else and something else and something else, but we're not the final answer, and somehow we might become the propagator or the person who might get them to see something different.
Something different, yeah.
So I hope my students aren't here.
So right now, I'm sharing the stage with probably a rather high percentage of the distinguished black landscape architects in the United States. Why are there not more, do you think? CL? Yeah, right.
That's on you, CL.
So why are there not more?
Why are there not more, and why? And also the related question, I guess, is how did it take so long to get even to this point? But I know that architecture is not that much farther ahead, really. I mean, there was a time not so many years ago when you could count on the fingers of your hands the notable black architects in this country. It's now somewhat more, but not where it should be either. But landscape has been, I think, particularly either slow to welcome a more diverse cohort of students, or maybe somehow that more diverse cohort of students has not until recently seen landscape architecture as a place in which they could themselves have the kind of impact that they would like to have.
Yeah,
What are your thoughts on it? You deal with this every day as a dean, of course.
Yeah, it's
so.
part of my job.
Right,
to do
right,
this.
right.
So I'll start with this. The lack of diversity, particularly with African American students in landscape architecture, is not just a gap in numbers.
Right.
What's at risk is a gap in perspectives that are actually needed for us to actually do designs, much like what Walter talked about. Like, well, we don't have to have that veil, right? We don't have to have that duality. We can just be, right, and be in spaces as part of the that full American story there. And I think, programs just need to do a better job of promoting what we do as landscape architects. I don't think there's any special sauce in terms of like black landscape architects do these. We talk about this stuff. These 3 or 4 things very well. Like we love space too. We like air and clean water and all these things.
And I bet
right?
you even like green plants too.
Yeah, I like bees.
Right,
right. So I think it's a matter of just being, better at like getting the word out about what we do. I will give you a little anecdote. For me, design was black. My late father was an architect.
Oh, okay.
First landscape architect I ever met, John Jackson, Memphis, Tennessee.
Right.
I was like, oh, this is great. I'm going to do this. I get to Arkansas. I love my alma mater, but I'm the second African American to graduate from that program, and that was in 2002.
Wow.
Okay.
Wow.
And so as
22 years ago.
Yeah, you talk about a veil, you get
Yeah.
there, right? So I just think programs have to do a better job, and you think about, the state of Arkansas. I'm picking on the state of Arkansas now, and Tennessee, where you have the Delta. We're in every state in the country. As Deion Sanders says, we're not hard to find. Right? So we just have to do a better job of getting out there and really championing how landscape architecture can actually serve our neighborhoods well. And again, go back to that, how we use landscape architecture as a tool to actually help neighborhoods out and not be that tool that can do things to people. I would say it that way. Marginalization. I don't know if you want to add anything
I
to
just
that.
add, and the academy needs to do a lot of work.
Sure.
Yeah.
When I started teaching at Berkeley, 91 was my first year. There were 4 African American tenured faculty. Guess how many there are today,
Wow.
right?
Wow.
Sono io.
Right,
That's
right,
it,
right.
right? I mean,
Yep.
and so again, and as I watch hiring, and as I watch, my colleagues and everyone shape these programs, and I travel around and go to other programs, it's not until the pendulum swings and hits something like 2020, or it swings back, that people go, oh, we need to diversify. It's like, really? Right, and we had a law that helped to diversify. I would have to say I was hired through affirmative action. I wouldn't be at Berkeley without that, but we got rid of that in 1995, and now schools are following. And so again, within the context of the US, if we understand the history, we have an understanding of the context we're in. So it's not an easy fix. It's not just ASLA coming up with a list of things. It's a structural issue,
Yeah.
right? And so if we don't kind of look at ourselves, the context of ourselves, and go like, we need to be representative of this landscape that we're trying to work within. And if you're not, why would a student come into your program and go, I want to do what you do? Or what is challenging their imagination to do that?
For them to see themselves.
For them
in
to
that
see
place.
themselves. And I saw a black architect and a black landscape architect very early in my career. But I also saw that they were somewhat handicapped in a certain way.
Yes, yes.
And that was just very clear to me. And I'm thinking, do I want to spend 30 years in this profession and be like this person who's been here 40 years?
Right, and has still
Right?
not been able to break through
Well,
a
who's
ceiling.
angry,
Yeah.
who's like,
Right,
I mean,
right,
I don't want to
right.
be like that. I want to have some joy, right? I want to
Well,
be.
I think you've succeeded quite well in that.
well, I don't know
think,
about
with-
that all the time, but
No,
just,
nobody does all the time. Come on, I mean, none of us are that lucky as to succeed all the time. Isn't this also partly a sort of classist issue in America as well as a racist one? That we tend to be economically discriminatory as well as racially discriminatory.
you mean in general?
In general,
Yeah.
but maybe particularly, but I mean that in connection with both architecture and landscape architecture, because they were once, long ago, thought of as, gentlemen's professions, or in the case of landscape, sometimes gentle ladies' professions, and genteel in a certain way, which may have made them all the less attractive to economically disadvantaged people of any race, let's say.
I think it's a question of access,
Yeah.
right? It's
Right.
also like oftentimes in our professions we have these very lofty stories about our professions. They're not that lofty,
Right.
right? We do some things, we have some tools,
Yeah.
we make spaces. They're not often those heroic stories of the architect, the landscape architect. In reference to teaching as an educator, I purposely go through this process with my students to take themselves out of the center. Right? It's not about
about you.
Yeah, it's not about you. It's about the people that you're working with. And I also think, one of the things that was, also very apparent, you talked about a little bit about history and having someone that was that taught history and they brought it alive for you. When my landscape history course, and I grew up in Memphis, I know who was working that land and that kind of stuff. And I'm looking at these history texts and there's nothing about the folks that are actually doing that work.
Right.
And you have conversations with faculty and they don't know.
Right.
And so you think about how small and marginalized that can make a student feel in that space if you're not even represented in the history books. And so you have to go out and do that work. And that's probably why I'm an educator now, because I was like, if I can't wait for somebody else to do it, I have to do it myself. And that's part of the problem. The education oftentimes is too Eurocentric. I'll just say it, right? And it's just like, well, what are we doing here?
Yeah, and then when you do get good people, you marginalize them because it's like, I got a black faculty member now, okay, you're going to be like,
You go do that.
you're going to do this, you're going to deal with all the equity stuff,
Everything.
you're going to deal with
Yeah,
all of
yeah,
that, right?
yeah,
And I remember when I first got to Berkeley, I went to the library and I was like, okay, I'm going to find blah, blah, blah's book, I'm going to find blah, blah, blah's article, and none of those tenured people had anything in the library. And of course, they were the ones nurturing me and my comrades there, and that was their job at that time. But that's just that kind of cyclical sort of thing. And I do think, again, when I was an undergraduate at A&T, we were excited to become landscape architecture. I mean, it was like this thing. It's like, didn't know anything about, I mean, I remember we went camping for the first time in the Blue Ridge Parkway. Roger, you remember this. You know, we had not been out of the city. We go up to the Blue Ridge Parkway, man, we in our bags, we had like dusted our chicken. We had the flour for the chicken. Man, we were frying chicken, like literally in the campground. Right? And you know, the smell is like permeating the forest, and all of a sudden the bears come out. Right? But it was that moment where
Sort of like the bees and the lavender.
but we were excited that there was this new medium, and we were bringing ourselves to it.
Yeah.
And then when people started saying, you can't do this, you know, that's when the door started closing.
Right.
Like, it's got to be this way, it can't be that way. And it's like, not everybody has those experiences. Right? Like, not everybody has the experience of, I'm 19 years old and I've never been to a national park.
Yeah.
And so I'm bringing the hood, you know, to the national
Right,
park.
right,
and I
right.
just remember that still sticks with me today. It's like the naivete and ignorance was beautiful. Because again, we were finding this new place, and our faculty allowed us in a way to like be in it.
Sure.
And then you go into the profession and immediately, no, this is what it looks like. It's tot lots. It's all of this standardized stuff. Right?
I agree with you. Although to some extent, I think everybody, I think it's compounded if you are African American in this situation. But to some extent, I think every earnest student hits against that wall at a certain point as well, which is not to excuse it at all, just to say it's such a problem. We are almost out of time, but we do want to leave a few minutes for some questions, and there will be some people circulating with microphones. So if you have one, there's a whole bunch of stuff I wanted to get to which you didn't, including asking you to talk a little bit about Oakland and your relationship to it. But let's hear some questions.
Hi, I'm Elliot. I am a graduate student at University of Maryland. Mr. Hood, what you said about making spaces where differences can share space without having to hide the differences in themselves really struck me. So I'm coming at landscape architecture with a strong interest in disability. I myself am disabled. And celebrating disability, or celebrating differences not despite those differences, but because of them, is so central to our understanding of disability. So a book that I read recently, Extraordinary Measures by Joseph Strauss, talks about disabled hearing, and it is the ways that physical, intellectual, and cognitive differences create understandings of music that might differ from the norm. And I read that and immediately thought of your explorations of exploring landscape through a visual mode of music, creating like music staffs from the patterns and the beats of landscape. And it made me think the question, whose music? Music for who? So I wanted to ask you, how has ability and disability factored into your conversations of shared space? Or is that a veil that you find yourself still wearing?
Okay, great.
It's a great question. I mean, it's one that we deal with, a lot in practice. But I also think it's one that, we've learned these great lessons around kind of how do you make spaces universal access when people talk about that. And one of the things that I'm constantly aware of is like, I hate the term even, a handicap ramp, right? Versus a sloped walk. And there is this default to the ramp versus going, you can just slope the ground. Right? And again, it's this codification, right, of that thing. And so, we try to push that, when I say we, my studio, but also in school, we try to talk about, again, the medium and how it allows everyone to be in the same space. And that's the tool, right? How do I grade a site, right? Which is one of those fundamental things, and sometimes you see that ramp and you go like, my God, you got space. to do this amazing thing. And I do think, if you're aware of it, it just becomes another way, right, to begin to like make the tent much bigger.
Right. Great. Thank you. Another one. Okay. Yes. And then over here. Yeah. Go ahead.
Hi, my name is Jada. I'm a grad student at Princeton University. In my thesis year, so a lot of what you've been discussing of landscape and also identity is very relevant for me and my interests. So you talked about the duality of identity. That's something I've been addressing through my research. But I'm also interested in like the duality of time, specifically for the African American identity and cultural experience. I was wondering, when you're designing over spaces or near spaces that have been used to oppress in the past, how do you mediate designing for repair with looking towards a better future?
Wow.
A simple question.
Yeah, really.
A yes or no question, right?
But I'll go with the time thing. Because I love the spatial time, and it reminds me what my grandmother would always say: there's good times and there's bad times, right? And they just exist, right? Now we're in a good time, but then there's that again, that just gives you this kind of healthy, at least I think, healthy way of understanding that even in these places there was a bad time, there can now be a good time. And it's not to erase the bad time, but there's an acknowledgement of these things can share that space. And, I was taken by the director of IAM saying she wanted to hold weddings at this space where we know our ancestors actually perished there, right? And at first I was taken back, but then as she started talking, I was like, wow. Because it then started reminding me of the churches in North Carolina or my upbringing in this place. And I did a painting of my grandfather in the living room doing the wake and the kids in the back room, right? And that first space was this space of sorrow, but right next to it was a space of joy. And then he went away, and and so again, allowing those spaces to live, and I think particularly in our minds, I think is the thing I find most healthy, because then I can go there, right? It exists, and it's not a nostalgia that I want to bring back, but it's a reflective nostalgia, right? That allow for the work to continue to have these conversations.
But isn't that also very much like what you said when you showed us the project where the monument to the Confederacy was retained?
Yeah.
That you argued against the simple idea of just demolishing them and erasing it from history.
I didn't argue. I didn't argue. I was just in a mind where I never even thought of getting rid of it.
Right. Okay.
I'm from that generation where I never thought of it, and so to me it was, I wanted to be in that same space
and create a dialogue.
Yeah, but today I get it where people don't want it. I mean, someone was like, I walk by that building every day and it's impacting me. I'm from a generation where I walked past that soldier, I didn't give a crap about that soldier. Right. But that's a thing that we have to acknowledge, is that through this generational change, the experience where if I lived with it long enough, then it's just with me. But if you've never had to live with it, and it's in your living room, you're like, get that out of here. Right. And so again, I just think we have to have that conversation around these memories, right? Because I do think that to me is our future in this great experiment in this country. And you can kind of see it right now. There's that inability to have conversations around difference. Right. I mean, very simple truths we can't even have discussions on. Right. And we're talking about some abstract thing like landscape architecture. I'm talking about a democracy. Right. And so if you can't do it there, you can't expect us to do it down here. Right. I mean, and so it's, in my lifetime, it's kind of interesting. I never thought we'd be at this moment where we're actually questioning, right, this whole thing. Not just the neighborhoods. Right. We're questioning the whole thing. And so I'm optimistic, but it also gives you a little reference when you're in the office working that, it's not this thing. We're down here. And maybe through this work, I can have some impact. And if enough of us did, maybe it can impact that thing up here. right?
Those are wonderful words to end on, and I think so. Thank you, Walter. Thank you so much, CL. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
And thank you all. Okay. Yeah, just for a moment. Yeah.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Paul and Walter and CL. We are really excited to welcome everybody over to the West Court to continue to celebrate this evening and celebrate the achievements and impact of Walter with some much needed food and drink for everybody. I want to just acknowledge and thank all of you for coming tonight. Also, some of our trustees who are here this evening, our chairman of the board, Tony Greenberg, and our incoming chair, Camila Garcia, and as well as the DC chairman of the City Council, Phil Mundelson, and many others. Thank you so much for coming tonight. Please shop in our store where we have Walter's book and a new biography of Vincent Scully. And thank you so much for joining us at the National Building Museum tonight. Thank you.
So we'll be in New York next month.